morning, church. Happy Sabbath. Thank you very much. It is good to be here with you this morning and to spend some time speaking about the history of evangelism in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Now, let me begin by suggesting to you that the Seventh-day Adventist Church is arguably the most mission-oriented and evangelistically oriented organization in the world today. I don't think there's another religion that meets globally every 5 years for session to discuss how they are going to reach the world with their message. Some companies that might want to sell products would do stuff like that, but I don't know of a religious body that meets deliberately to discuss how can we take this message, and that's just on a global level. That's, besides the more localized meetings, such as your unions and your conferences that get together. And by the way, if you go to church business meetings and board meetings, I'm not supposed to say this, it's not what I'm talking about, but you never discuss evangelism. There's a big problem in that church. And, some of us get excited because we're going to go fight at meetings. But meetings are there to discuss how are we going to reach our territory with our message. Are we together? Thank you. So the Seventh-day Adventist Church is mission-oriented, but this was not always the case. Did you know that there was a time in the history that Adventists did not want to evangelize? Strange as it sounds, it's true. But nevertheless, after a brief period, they regained their missionary thrust, and still until this very day, Seventh-day Adventists have as their core business the salvation of lost souls. Seventh-day Adventist Church traces, of course, its most recent origins back to a farmer from Massachusetts in the United States, a man by the name of William Miller. When his keen interest in Bible prophecies led him to the discovery that Jesus would come about 1843, he was reluctant to share his convictions publicly. He did not consider himself to be a public speaker nor an authority on Bible doctrine. And so, of course, he was reluctant, but when he received his first invitation to address a crowd publicly, he soon received so many invitations that he was no longer able to keep up with the invites that he was getting. And so as the time came closer to the coming of Jesus, they were desperate to get their message out faster and farther than he could with a few invitations that he was able to accept. And so they started publishing their views in articles and periodicals. And the Adventist main publication that time was known as Signs of the Time, probably because their message was influenced by the rapid fulfilling of events, the signs of the time that were taking place, which all indicated that the coming of Jesus was near. And so as the Millerite movement grew, they were hesitant at first to form a distinct Christian body. The Millerite preaching didn't say to people, leave those churches where you're at. They said, stay in those churches. Because really they had one peculiar doctrine at the beginning. Their one distinctive doctrine was the personal, visible coming of Jesus before the millennium and not after the millennium. But aside from that, many of their beliefs they held in common with other Christian denominations. So they didn't necessarily see the need to call people to come out of their churches and form, a distinct church. They thought our strategy must be to purify those churches from within. Of course, there were some Millerite preachers like George Storrs who started preaching on conditionalism, which is the belief that we don't possess inherent immortality. And then there was Frederick Wheeler who preached about the Sabbath. But many of the Millerite leaders never accepted these truths, such as Miller and Himes. And so at first, in line with all other Protestant denominations, they identified Babylon in the Bible as symbolizing the Roman Catholic Church. And so some of our Millerite leaders, also because of their heritage of the Christian connectionists, also saw church organization as Babylon. And so they did not want to form a separate church apart from the churches where they were already. But then as they came closer to 1843, and the coming of Jesus was about to take place. And by the way, I'm not making a mistake. I do mean 1843. It was first 1843 and it was revised later, because every time when I speak about 1843, people ask, are you sure it's not 1844? But 1844 is a revision of 1843. But as they came closer to 1843, they started receiving opposition from those churches, and those churches started to denounce them as heretics and disfellowship them. And so there was one millerite preacher who started to point to all of the churches who are opposed to the personal reign of Jesus Christ as Babylon. And it was then for the first time when they realized we have to separate from those churches. So now Babylon did not only include the Roman Catholic Church as traditionally held by Protestants, but they were now saying that if we are disfellowshipped in the Methodist Church, for example, for believing that Jesus is coming, then the Methodist Church is Babylon too. And so now for the first time, they started to tell people Babylon is fallen, all of Christianity is fallen, come out of her, and they started preaching for the first time a missionary evangelistic in such an evangelistic way that called people to come and to separate from those churches because they viewed those churches as being opposed. So we find that the evangelistic thrust of the Millerite movement is found in two things. Number one, the prophetic self-understanding. Who are we as a movement? And our identity, our prophetic understanding of who we are as a movement informs us what we should be doing. The second thrust of their missionary activity comes from their conviction of the nearness of the coming of Jesus. When they believed wholeheartedly that he is coming in 1843, they were desperate to get this message out, to get many people. Now, of course, my question to us today, do we believe that Jesus is coming very soon? Because if we believe that Jesus is coming very, very soon, then that should motivate us that the time that we have to let the whole world know that he's coming is not much. And we should desperately put forth every action that we can to tell others that Jesus is coming soon. And so, of course, the position advanced by Miller was that Jesus would come anytime between March 1843 and March 1844. And when Jesus did not come in March 1844, a general disappointment prevailed. But they came to understand themselves to be in the tarrying time of the bridegroom. You will know from the parable of the bridegroom, which Jesus tells, that there was a time when the bridegroom tarried. And so they believed, okay, we are now in the tarrying time. Let's wait. Perhaps he's still coming. But eventually, of course, that date started to be looked at closer, and under the Bible studies of a man by the name of Samuel Snow, they began to preach a revised date when they started looking at the atonement. When did the atonement happen? And when they realized that, okay, the most probable date for the coming of Jesus is October 22, 1844. And so now they were revived again. Okay, we were mistaken by this date, but this is a certain date. Jesus is coming. And so again, they did everything that they possibly could to reach the world with their message. Get ready. It won't be long. Even somebody like William Miller didn't accept October 22 until early in October. But once they accepted the message, they realized this is the date. Jesus is soon to come. So let's tell the world that Jesus is coming. And of course, as you know, Jesus did not come. And so this time, the disappointment was so great that it nearly threatened the very existence of the Adventist movement. And so the Millerites disintegrated into two main streams. We call the first group the Albany Adventists. They were organized under Joshua Himes, and even William Miller joined that group at some point. But that group basically believed that our calculations were off. Let's continue to look and set a date when Jesus will come. But then there was the second group known as the Bridegroom Adventists. Now, the Bridegroom Adventists believed that the date was right. It is October 22, 1844. However, they said to themselves, maybe the significance of what that date means we did not quite understand. But still, based on the parable of Matthew 25 and the bridegroom, they also believed that when the bridegroom arrived, he shut the door. And so for a while, they believed what we commonly call the shut door theory. They felt there's no longer any need to evangelize because the door of mercy must have closed on October 22, 1844. So there's no need to evangelize. Those who was not ready for Jesus to come, they are eternally lost. And we cannot explain why he did not come. However, the parable is clear. When the bridegroom came, the door was shut. So if you are not saved, tough luck. All we will concentrate on doing is being ready and evangelizing the discouraged Adventists who fell away from that truth. But of course, they ran into a problem soon because some people did become converted still. And by the way, some of our main leaders were in that group. James White, Alan Harmon, Joseph Bates, Hiram Edson, Owen Crozier. They were part of that group who believed that the door was shut. Now, the critics of Alan White often point to the shut door experience to discredit Alan White. And let me say to you, before I show you how Alan White's first visions actually led away from the shut door understanding, that Alan White is not the first prophet to have her understanding corrected by God. There was another prophet or other prophets who also had to have their understanding corrected by God. We are familiar with the prophet Nathan, right? He came to David and David said, I want to build the house of God. And he says to David, sure, the Lord will be with you. And he went away and the Lord informed him otherwise. He received light from God and he had to go back and correct the message that he said was from God. But anyway, Ellen White never preached on shut door. Anyway, although she did admit that she had the conviction, along with all other Adventists, that the door of mercy was shut. So let's see how the first three visions of Ellen White indicated that Jesus was not yet coming. The first vision, received in December 1844, just 2 months after the Great Disappointment, hinted that the second coming might still be a distance away, because in that vision, she said the city was a great way off. And so there was still some work to be done before Jesus would come. The second major vision was in February 1845, known as the bridegroom vision. There she saw Jesus standing before the Father as a high priest. And so now we understand, if Jesus after 1844 is still a high priest, atonement is still being made, sinners can still be forgiven because he's still a high priest. The third vision, and this was while James White was still setting a date for the end of 1845, was the time of trouble vision, in which the angel told her that Jesus will not come before the time of trouble. And so the time of trouble has not come yet, and so Jesus cannot come yet, so there is still a work for us to be done. And so around about this time in 1846, Owen Crozier developed the doctrine of the sanctuary, and Joseph Bates developed the doctrine of the Sabbath, and Joseph Bates started connecting the doctrine of the sanctuary and the Sabbath. I don't have time to explain that to you, but in that they saw that we still have a mission to reach the world, because now they realized that the Sabbath day has eschatological significance, because in the last days, the Sabbath message must still be restored. Jesus will not come until people, because at that time, more or less, nobody was keeping Sabbath, until people start keeping the Sabbath. And so again, based on their prophetic understanding, based on who they are as a mission, they needed to proclaim the Sabbath more fully. It was this theology. Let me just read to you the experience. This is not Ellen White's words, but Ellen White had a vision where Jesus was in the holy place. And then he opened the Ark of the Covenant and he picked up the 10 Commandments. And as she looked at the 10 Commandments, the fourth commandment shone above them all with a halo of glory around it. And then she said, from that she saw that God's people went forth to proclaim the Sabbath more fully. And so they started to connect the Sabbath with the seal of God. They understood that God's children still have to be sealed. And what is God's seal? And so until we get the Sabbath out there, Jesus cannot yet quite come. And so Ellen White's continued influence led to three major evangelistic avenues in the early history of the church. The first one is publishing ministries. Publishing ministries began in November 1848 in a vision received by Ellen White, where she saw a light going clear around the world. And she said to her husband, I have a message for you. You need to start writing a little paper to get our message into the hands of the people. Start small, but means will come and it will grow. And they started, of course, the Present Truth, which soon became the Sabbath, the Advent Review and Sabbath Herald, and that still exists today as the Adventist Review. And this is just one of the many literature organs that the Seventh-day Adventist Church has. The second evangelistic avenue encouraged by Ellen White was medical or health ministries, which began in 1866 with the opening of the Western Health Reform Institute. Ellen White had a vision, and she was shown that God would have Seventh-day Adventists open their own institutions of healing, and that this would be like a right arm to the gospel. The third avenue of ministry was education ministry, started in 1874 with the opening of Battle Creek College, and Ellen White again expressed that God would have us work and shape the minds of the young people, and so they started with schools and with colleges. And of course, as the colleges opened, they started training ministers and pastors, and so more and more Seventh-day Adventists began to be capable of preaching the gospel publicly. And so this gave rise to the era of tents, tabernacles, and theaters, where they had public campaigns and they preached doctrines. Do you still remember those times when we'd have 3-week, 4-week crusades and campaigns? You can't do that nowadays. People are just too busy perhaps to come to campaigns and crusades, but they would fill a tent, they would fill a stadium, and they would preach powerfully. I added this next picture to show you how they advertised. Today, of course, it's easier. We create a poster and we post on Facebook and we post on Instagram and everywhere. They often made their adverts on their cars. When they just started having cars, and they would drive around all in the city, and from about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, if the service starts at 7, 4 o'clock, they go park that car in front of that building so that everybody can know it's going to happen here tonight. And of course, in Africa, one of the earliest methods, because they couldn't afford cars yet at that time, were wagons, where they would place a wagon with these advertisements that there will be public meetings. Unfortunately, I do not have time to speak more about this, but I should also mention that there was also an evangelistic strategy that was used in the earlier days, where they would debate with pastors from other denominations. But Ellen White discouraged this, because there was one gentleman who debated with spiritualizers, and then he became mesmerized and became a spiritualist himself. And so Ellen White discourages public evangelism when it can be, public debating as an evangelistic tool, because it did not prove to be as effective. So I'm going to skip that. But then we get into the era of innovative evangelism. As soon as technology became available, Seventh-day Adventists made sure they were on the radio. As soon as television became available, they made sure that they were on the television. And so in 1929 already, HMS Richards became the first Seventh-day Adventist to be on radio, preaching on a program called Family Ministry. And that soon caught up that the 1 hour slot that they had at the radio was not enough. And so in 1837, they established the Voice of Prophecy radio station, which became the very first national radio station, religious program radio station in America at that time. And so now they could 24/7, publish their message over the radio. And then in 1942, they established the Adventist Bible Correspondence School, also under the Voice of Prophecy, because now people were writing to them saying, we need to know more. Can you please teach us more? And so they started the correspondence school in which they could send the literature over there. And of course, Adventists have been very good with translation work too. Soon after that, they had La Voz de Esperanza, which is a Spanish version of the same institution. And then 1950, Faith for Today by William Fagel became one of the first faith-based television programs. And then It Is Written started in 1956 as the first religious program in color. Faith for Today was still black and white. And of course, in 1974, they also started Breath of Life, which specifically was a telecast for people of color in America at that time. And so we see that as more and more technological platforms became available, Seventh-day Adventists were soon to join that to get their message out. And today, the Seventh-day Adventist Church continues to broadcast the gospel message over Adventist World Radio, Hope Channel, and this is aside from the many other supporting ministries which also exist, such as It Is Written, 3ABN, Amazing Facts, and let's just see how the Seventh-day Adventist Church has grown. Today, the Seventh-day Adventist Church is established in 235 countries in the world. That means that is 90% of countries. There are 235 countries in the world, but Seventh-day Adventists are established in 212. That's 90%. There are only 23 countries where there are no Adventist presence, and 4 African countries where there's no Adventist presence: Mauritania, Somalia, Western Sahara, and in our own division, the islands of Comoros. And then we'll come back to that point. We have 13 divisions, 63 union conferences. Let's get to the bigger stuff. About schooling, Adventist education continues. We have 118 tertiary institutions, that's colleges and universities. We have 38 worker training institutions. Those are institutions which does not necessarily offer degrees, but they train you for work in the church, such as evangelism or pastoral ministry, or but it's not a formal degree per se. We have 2,640 secondary schools operating around the world, 6,623 primary schools, and we have 2,023,884 students enrolled in all of our schools, in all of our universities. Now you think about that, brothers and sisters, 2 million people on a daily basis sitting under the presence and the teaching of an Adventist teacher. This should be a very powerful evangelistic tool. In terms of health, we have 22 food industries worldwide, 229 hospitals, 129 nursing and retirement centers, 1,475 clinics, 128 dental clinics, 15 orphanage homes, and we have more than 21 million outpatient visits on an annual basis. Again, think about the 21 million sick people coming to Seventh-day Adventists for help every year. Our message is going out there, brothers and sisters. But that's not where the evangelism, the core business of evangelism is still in the local church, because that is our biggest influence. Because we have 95,297 organized, 21,912,161 Seventh-day Adventist believers. Now, a few years ago, we had that each one reach one. Imagine all 21 million. Each one reach one. Next year, we will be what? 44 million. And so the core business of evangelism is still in the local, to tell the world that Jesus is coming soon. Brothers and sisters, our evangelistic and missionary thrust lies at the local church, and the Adventist Church has always been desperate to get its message out there in any way possible. Do you remember this leaflet that we received some time ago? It's called the Total Member Involvement, and it gives 100 ways in which you can reach the world. And I highlighted some. I don't know how much time I have left, probably a minute, 3 minutes, thank you. I highlighted some that seems out of the ordinary, but it's something that almost every one of us can do. Just listen to this. Number 1, cook a meal for a neighbor or a co-worker who has been ill. Does that sound like evangelism to you? Doesn't sound like the traditional setting up a campaign, but you can cook a meal for somebody who has been ill. Help your neighbor wash his car. That's a method of evangelism. Welcome newcomers in the neighborhood. Here's a nice one. Thank the janitor for the work they are doing. Now, we often accept that the toilets and everything at work must be clean, but we must take time to thank them. Do the laundry for a friend who has just had a baby. Let somebody who's signaling on the highway come into your lane. Now, we get so upset when people just cut in, but it's evangelism when we say, come in, my brother. You can drive in front of me. If someone is sitting alone in church, go and sit with them. Here's one that I don't like. Remember to tip. Hold the elevator when you see somebody is still coming. And then take some food for someone who has lost loved one. Of course, there's 100. I don't have time to go through all 100. The point I'm trying to make is, among this list of 100 things, there must be at least something that you can do. But we cannot be in a situation where we simply do nothing. Because this church has been called and organized for a special mission. And that mission is to take this everlasting gospel to the entire world in our generation. And may God continue to bless you as you tell the world that Jesus is coming soon.